I found the first letter on my doorstep one gray morning, tucked under the thin layer of frost that clung to the concrete. It was a plain envelope, no return address, no markings. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was mine. I tore it open, half expecting a note I had written and misplaced. The words inside were banal, almost mundane, a simple reminder to feed the cat and water the plant. But I hadn't written it. Not yesterday, not ever. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. I set the letter on the kitchen table and stared at it for what felt like hours. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches, a subtle rhythm that made my stomach twist. Every familiar object in the room suddenly seemed off, alien in its stillness. When I looked down again, the words seemed to shift slightly, the curves of my letters bending in ways I didn't remember making. My pulse quickened. I told myself it must be a prank, a neighbor trying to unsettle me. But the letters, they were perfect. Mornings were always the same. I brewed coffee, the bitter aroma filling the small kitchen, and watched the sun crawl over the rooftops. My apartment felt safe, predictable, the hum of the radiator a gentle comfort against the cold outside. I left for work, briefcase in hand, nodding at the doorman who knew my routine by heart. The streets were noisy but familiar, each honking horn and shouted greeting blending into the background of my orderly life. At my office, the hum of fluorescent lights and the clatter of keyboards grounded me. I replied to emails, organized files, and attended meetings, my thoughts looping through numbers, schedules, and the odd news article I skimmed while sipping lukewarm coffee. Lunch was always the same sandwich from the corner deli. I watched people pass by the window, their conversations fragmented, distant. I had a routine, a rhythm, and it comforted me more than I realized. Evenings were predictable, too. I returned home, slipped off my coat, and watered my small plant by the window. The cat padded silently around my feet, a warm, familiar presence that made the apartment feel less empty. On weekends, I would read in the living room, sunlight spilling across the pages. The smell of old paper and coffee was comforting, the only sound my cat's purring and the faint traffic hum outside. I felt normal. My friends visited occasionally. We drank wine, laughed quietly, and shared stories of the week. Their lives were chaotic, unpredictable, but mine remained a calm line, a pattern I could trust. At night, I would shower, brush my teeth, and check the locks on every door. The apartment was mine alone, safe, and yet, a shadow sometimes lingered at the corner of my vision, vanishing whenever I looked directly at it. I had a small calendar on the wall, each day meticulously filled in with tasks and reminders. Crossing off completed items brought a subtle satisfaction, a sense that time and life were still within my control. Sleep came easily, or at least it did. I would lie in bed, the city quieting outside, and feel a faint comfort in the darkness. Everything was as it should be, predictable, manageable, safe. The second letter arrived on a Thursday. I found it on my pillow, folded neatly. At first, I thought it had slipped in while I slept. The handwriting, again, was unmistakably mine. I frowned, turning the envelope over in my hands. Inside, the note said nothing alarming, just a reminder to lock the front door and turn off the lights. But the phrasing was odd, almost hesitant, like it was written by someone imitating my casual tone. I told myself it must be mail mishandling, a prank by someone in the building. The rational part of my mind repeated the same line. It's impossible. You didn't write this. Yet the letters themselves seemed to whisper a familiarity I couldn't ignore. That evening, I noticed small changes in my apartment. A chair slightly angled from where I'd left it, a mug not quite where I set it. I chalked it up to sleepwalking or a misstep in my own absent-mindedness. I returned from work the next day to find the letter on my desk. This one said simply, "You left your keys in the door." I remembered locking it. I distinctly remembered. A chill ran down my spine, though I forced a laugh, shaking my head. Even my cat seemed uneasy. arching its back slightly when I bent to pick it up. The house felt heavier, the light dimmer. Still, I tried to ignore it, to keep my evening routine as normal as possible. I double-checked every lock, every window, every bolt. Nothing was out of place, yet the letter's words lingered in my mind like a quiet accusation, a subtle reminder that someone, or something, was paying attention. On my commute, I felt distracted, noticing reflections in shop windows that didn't match my movements. People's faces blurred unnaturally. The city felt just slightly off, though no one else seemed to notice. That night, I found the next letter in the kitchen sink. This time it instructed me to check the oven. I hadn't even been cooking. My hands shook as I opened the oven, finding only empty racks and a faint, metallic smell I didn't recognize. I slept with the lights on, lying in bed with my cat pressed to my side. My mind churned, replaying each letter, each word. I told myself I was imagining things, that there was a logical explanation. I hoped it was true. I convinced myself it had to be a coincidence. Perhaps the building staff were playing a practical joke, or the letters were being slipped under my door by a bored neighbor. I reminded myself that handwriting can be imitated. Surely that was all it was. I started checking my handwriting samples online, comparing them to the letters. There were subtle differences, I told myself. A flourish here, a loop there. Rationally, it wasn't mine. My handwriting didn't move like that. I left my apartment for errands, determined to normalize my thoughts. I bought groceries, chatted with the cashier, and felt the familiar comfort of routine. The letters could not touch me outside, I reassured myself. I asked a friend to examine the letters. She smiled, raised an eyebrow, and said they looked like mine. I laughed it off, saying, "She's exaggerating. It's just handwriting. It's similar, not identical." Yet a small knot formed in my stomach. Back home, I told myself the letters were harmless, that they couldn't cause real harm. I set them aside, buried under bills and old receipts, pretending they were nothing more than misplaced junk mail. I repeated my evening routine meticulously: lock doors, check windows, water the plant, feed the cat. Everything was accounted for. My apartment was still mine. The letters were powerless. I tried journaling to calm myself, writing down each day's events in careful script. My own hand on paper felt grounding, a way to reclaim control. The letters were just paper, I reminded myself, nothing more. Even when the letters appeared again, this time on my bookshelf, I shrugged. I had moved a few books around recently. Maybe the letters slipped in among them. Logical explanations were comforting, and I clung to them. I started keeping the lights dimmed in the living room, telling myself it was coziness. In truth, I was avoiding the shadows the letters seemed to stir in the corners of my vision. Still, I told myself it was imagination. By the end of the week, I almost believed it. Almost. The letters continued to arrive, predictable yet banal, and I smiled faintly, thinking perhaps it was an odd prank. I reassured myself. I was still safe, still in control. The letters began arriving at precise intervals, each morning and evening without fail. I noticed the timing first, the predictable rhythm like a heartbeat outside my control. I started marking them on my calendar, tracking each arrival with a pencil that trembled slightly in my hand. One letter told me to close the blinds before sunset. Another reminded me to turn the radiator down. I hadn't forgotten these things. I did them out of habit. The instructions were trivial, almost absurd, yet they carried a weight that pressed against my chest. I began noticing patterns in phrasing. Certain words recurred. Remember, don't forget, check. The repetition, initially comforting, now felt deliberate. I wondered if someone was studying me, observing my habits through some meticulous lens I could not see. At work, I found myself distracted. I replayed the letters in my mind, each phrase looping endlessly. Typing reports became difficult, my thoughts fractured by the weight of anticipation. Which letter would appear next, and what would it say? One afternoon, I found a letter folded into my laptop case. "You left your files unlocked," it read. I hadn't. My hands shook as I checked my desk. Nothing had been disturbed. The letters' accuracy unsettled me more than the words themselves. I began checking corners of rooms obsessively, behind doors, under cushions, in drawers. Each time I found nothing except the letters themselves. The absence became oppressive. I felt eyes on me even when I was alone. Sometimes the letters contained observations rather than instructions. You are wearing your blue sweater again. The cat is sleeping by the window. These weren't reminders. They were notices. Someone, or something, was watching me. The predictability of arrival made me anxious rather than comforted. I counted the hours between letters, anticipated each one like a looming bell toll. The pattern was relentless, unyielding, and deeply personal. Even mundane tasks became rituals. I checked locks thrice, counted steps to the mailbox, and ensured the cat's water bowl was full. I felt compelled to follow the letter's guidance, though it made no rational sense. By the third week, I started photographing each letter, storing them in digital folders. The act of documenting gave me a false sense of control. I could see the pattern clearly now, but clarity did nothing to ease the growing tension coiling in my chest. I began noticing tiny differences in the letters, slight smudges, faint variations in pressure, almost imperceptible shifts in style. They were mine, but not mine. The realization gnawed at me like a slow, cold hunger. Sleep became restless. I dreamt of envelopes sliding across floors I didn't recognize, hands that looked like mine writing words I would never say. Morning brought the same letters, identical yet slightly changed, as if the night had rehearsed them without me. One morning, I found a letter on my bathroom mirror, written across the fogged glass. "You washed your hands wrong." I froze, staring at my reflection. My own handwriting, my own voice, yet accusing, intimate, as if someone had reached inside me and knew my smallest habits. The next letter was pinned to my coat. "You left the zipper undone." I had zipped it. My mind raced, imagining someone following me, knowing every trivial detail, recording every motion, every choice, every habit I thought private. I began to dread leaving the apartment. Even walking to the mailbox felt like stepping into a trap. Each footstep echoed with the certainty that something, or someone, knew where I would be, what I would do, before I did it myself. The letters became increasingly specific. "You forgot to take your vitamins this morning. Your shoelaces were uneven." The triviality was terrifying. They didn't need to threaten me. They only needed to know me. The invasion was total. I started covering surfaces with paper, checking for fingerprints, erasing smudges. The letters continued to arrive. I began leaving decoy notes in my handwriting, hoping to catch whoever was behind it, but the next letters ignored them entirely. Even my dreams carried the letters. I awoke to find new ones waiting on my nightstand, notes I had never written appearing in the exact style of my hand, the ink dry and unmistakable. I couldn't escape. I tried recording myself writing. Hours of footage proved useless. The letters didn't care about evidence, didn't respond to cameras or barriers. They arrived anyway, always perfectly timed, always unnervingly precise. I noticed subtle psychological manipulations. A note would remark on my mood. "You seem anxious today." I would check the calendar, the weather, my reflection. Nothing explained it. Yet it was true, undeniably true, and I had no one to validate it with. The cat began hiding, hissing at corners I had never feared. Even the pet sensed something wrong. I felt my apartment shrinking, walls pressing inward as the letters took up space, invading every surface, every thought, every habit I thought my own. My friends stopped returning calls. When I tried to explain, they laughed nervously. "It's just a prank," they said. "You're imagining things." Their dismissal made the letters louder in my mind, the invasion more personal, my isolation more complete. I began labeling drawers, doors, and objects with my own handwriting, trying to reclaim identity and control. The letters responded to nothing. They ignored every precaution, every system I invented, adapting instantly, always one step ahead, always inside me. I stopped trusting reflections, recordings, even my own memory. Each letter confirmed my worst fear. I was no longer the author of my own life. Something else was writing it, shaping it, narrating me in words I thought were mine. I stopped answering my phone. Each call felt like intrusion, a reminder that the world outside could see nothing, but inside, the letters knew everything. I didn't leave my apartment unless necessary, and then only briefly, eyes darting, heart hammering. The building felt different. Hallways stretched longer, shadows pooled unnaturally in corners. Neighbors passed without noticing me, their indifference a cruel contrast to the intimacy of the letter's knowledge. I was unseen and watched all at once. Groceries arrived at my door, but I barely touched them. I feared even leaving a bag unattended would provoke a message. Every note I received felt like an echo of my failures, a ledger of every unnoticed detail of my day. I tried speaking to friends again, desperate for grounding. They hesitated, their smiles forced. "You need rest," they said. "Stress is getting to you." I realized no one could see what I was experiencing. No one could validate the invasion of my life. The letters became scolding. "You missed breakfast. Your shirt is crooked. You hesitated too long at the elevator." Each note shredded my confidence, reduced my autonomy. Even trivial mistakes were cataloged, highlighted, amplified by the unseen observer. I stopped sleeping in my own bed. The letters sometimes waited there, mocking me in ink I recognized as mine. I curled up on the couch with blankets drawn tight, listening to the soft breathing of the cat and the oppressive silence of my apartment. Windows became barriers I peered through cautiously. Outside, life carried on, oblivious to the subtle tyranny inside my apartment. I felt like a ghost in my own world, haunted by my own handwriting. I tried moving furniture to confuse whoever, or whatever, was behind the letters. The next note reflected the changes, adapting instantly, commenting on the repositioned objects, as if the walls themselves had eyes. I started talking to myself, repeating tasks aloud to assert ownership. I feed the cat. I water the plant. I lock the doors. The letters ignored these protests, continuing their personal commentary, each line sharper, each observation more intimate. Isolation became total. I realized I could trust nothing, not objects, not memories, not my own hands. The letters had claimed me, and I had no one to turn to, no refuge from the relentless awareness that my life was no longer mine. I found a letter inside my own hand, folded and tucked into my sleeve. The paper was thin, almost translucent, and the ink was wet. Trembling, I unfolded it. The words were simple. "You wrote this. I am you." My reflection in the mirror shifted as I read it. Not physically, but something in my expression, my eyes, the line of my jaw, felt wrong. Familiar, yet foreign. The realization struck me like ice. The letters were not sent by anyone outside. Another note appeared on the floor. "I have always been here." I dropped to my knees, staring at the paper, the handwriting identical to my own, but imbued with intent I couldn't comprehend. It was inside me, inside my thoughts, inside my movements. I searched the apartment, desperate, irrational. Every drawer, every surface, every corner held more notes, all written in my hand, all stating facts I had not yet done, or perhaps already done. The letters were a mirror of me, but not me. I looked back at the first letter I had received. Slowly, terrifyingly, I understood. It had never been external. Each message was a projection of something inside, something patient, observing, learning, rewriting me. I had never been alone, and in the bathroom mirror, ink began to form across the glass again. My handwriting, my words. I realized with horror that the letters weren't just a reflection. They were a force, a consciousness, and I was both the writer and the recipient, trapped in a loop I could never escape. I wake each morning to letters scattered across every surface, their ink still fresh, though I swear I didn't write them. The cat avoids the room now, hissing at corners I cannot see. I feel the weight of countless eyes, my own, pressing down on me. Sometimes I catch glimpses of my reflection moving independently, a subtle lag in the mirror, a twitch in the corner of my eye. I speak aloud, but the letters answer first, describing my words before I even form them. I leave the apartment briefly, but the letters appear on the doormat, in the elevator, even tucked inside my shoes. There is no escape. Every step, every breath, every thought is cataloged, inscribed, replayed in ink that is mine and not mine. At night, I curl up with the cat, whispering reassurances I no longer believe. Outside, the city hums unaware. Inside, the letters continue to arrive, patiently, intimately. I am trapped with myself, with what I have become, and I cannot distinguish the author from the victim.